See, I have chosen a very contemporary problem which we are discussing each and every day, and that is democracy. My topic is faith, state, democracy, Buddhist influence on political thought and political movements in ancient and modern India. I'll try to correlate the Buddhist basic principle with the principle of democracy that we are having today. Buddhism emerged as a religion in ancient India between the 6th and 4th century BC as a socio-cultural reaction to rigidity and ritualism that had come to define Hinduism. With its more inclusive and simple philosophy based on ideas of non-violence, moderation and good conduct, it represented a newfound avenue for engagement with faith and realism at a moral, personal, practiced day-to-day level and beyond the pale of intricate religious practice for those sections of society who had previously remained on the margins of Hinduism due to matter related to purity, pollution and birth. Further, since religion, society and politics have always been closely immense, the widespread acceptance and reach of Buddhism on account of possibility of rupture it presented did not happen in a socio-political vacuum. The period that marks the ascendancy of Buddhism was also one of the acute social turmoil and transition. An urban-based, commercial, prosperous, dynamic class society was emerging. This society was an assortment of tribe, people, language, Dravidian, Indo-European, Astro-Asiatic, Sino-Tibetan. It was trying desperately to hold on to strains of Vedic Indic culture while at the same time becoming exposed through tenuous links of development in Asia and Europe beyond mountains. It was hence a time of unprecedented turmoil which was accompanied with rampant immorality. There was slavery, runaway slaves, robbers, warfare between clans, patricides in many monarchies, sons not caring for parents, wicked women provoking their husband, and immoral individualism rampant. This was, I have quoted this from Gaya, and the book is Buddhism in India, Challenging Brahmanism and Caste. It was against this socio-political backdrop when the older religious order no longer seemed adequate to contain the anxiety of a society in flux, and that Buddhism provided a new perspective from which to view and approach the world. In fact, according to Gail Gombe, Buddha's famous fire sermon has been reinterpreted by scholars of Buddhism to refer not only to a psychological burning of all that is corrupting to the mind, but also metaphor for a world on fire due to intense turmoil of socio-political transformation it caught up in. Buddha says, "Monk, all is aflame." What is all is aflame? The eye is aflame. The forms are aflame. Consciousness at the eye is aflame. Contact at the eye is aflame. And whatever there is that arises in dependence of contact at the eye, experience as pleasure and pain. Neither pain nor pleasure, that too as a flame. Aflame with what? Aflame with fire of passion, the fire of aversion, the fire of delusion. Aflame, I tell you, with birth, aging, death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress and despair. I have quoted from the same book, Om Buddha faith even at the time of inception, presented the people a possibility of aspiring for and working towards a world devoid of tyranny of anarchy. The vices of greed fueled by individualism, and one where religion and the comfort that it brings in times of uncertainty was accessible to all, irrespective of their place in caste or class hierarchy. To a larger extent, this very essence has influenced and is mirrored in the nature of a state, and that has developed in most colonial India, the exclusive spirit of Indian constitution and democracy. At the same time, it cannot be assumed that only because the constitution or democratic rights normatively guarantees equality and the freedom of choice in matter both religion and secular, that condition of this equality across religious and caste lines has seamlessly existed in India without challenges. In moments of rupture, where certain sections of society reach a tipping point of oppression, prevalent at a structural level, seek to break out against it through revolution, also drive strength from Buddhism in waging their struggle against system. And so, just as the case of the emergence of Buddhism in ancient India amidst the times of intense political, socio-political turmoil, Buddhism is reconstructed, reimagined in modern India to power political movements against oppression and injustice. The remainder of this paper shall look at the influence and entanglement of Buddhism and its core philosophy with the state and polity in ancient India, especially the Mauryan Empire during the reign of Ashoka. At the same time, it shall focus its lens on colonial and post-colonial India by looking at its impact on evolution in Indian political thought, on the political movement spearheaded by Ambedkar in the Dalit Mahar community outside the fold of Hinduism through a mass conversion of Buddhism. Now the broader topic is Dhamma, Karma and the agency of individual in Buddhist philosophy. The doctrine of karma and transmigration of soul is the central to Hindu philosophy, as we all know. It is premised on the principle that man's action and deed in this current lifetime dictate whether or not after death his soul will be freed from the cycle of birth or rebirth. If not, then in which form it shall return to moral world. Further, Brahmanism expounds that one can still overturn and realign his or her journey in the afterlife, even having committed bad deeds and actions during the lifetime through the performance of rituals and sacrifices. Buddhism too engages with the concept of karma as it refers to the Pali canon karma. I'm sorry if I am not able to pronounce it correctly. However, it does so in such a way that the concept is almost entirely reinterpreted. In Satir, Buddha says, interpreted karma is not in terms of chain of action leading to rebirth itself, but in terms of immediate psychological subjective actor in the immediate present. The focus in Buddhism is hence on the individual, which is essential in shaping of his on destiny, on the intention of his action. The emphasis on the agency of the individual in deciding what is good and bad, both his or her entitlement and ramifications of action taken flowing directly from the decision, something that lies at the core of the liberal democracy. It is in a manner defined by freedom of individual to make choices. At the same time, these choices and decisions are not made in vacuum, are bound by the definite discourse of right and duties. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in his speech delivered at Washington DC in 1993, elaborates upon the relationship and intersection between Buddhism and democracy as such. He says, the Buddha saw that life's very purpose is happiness. He also saw that while ignorance binds being in endless frustration and suffering, wisdom is liberating. Modern democracy is based on principle that all human beings are essentially equal, that each of us has an equal right to life, liberty and happiness. Buddhism too recognizes that human beings are entitled to dignity, that all members of human family have an equal and inalienable right to liberty, not just in terms of political freedom, but also at the fundamental level of freedom from fear and want. Irrespective of whether we are rich or poor, educated or uneducated, belonging to one nation or another, to one religion or another, adhering to this philosophy, this ideology or that ideology, each of us is just a human being like everyone else. Not only do we all desire happiness, seek to avoid suffering, but each of us has an equal right to pursue these goals. This was stated by His Holiness Dalai Lama ji in 1993, the lecture delivered at Washington DC. Further, the idea of who and what individual is also differs vastly in Buddhist Dhamma and Brahminical Hinduism. Firstly, unlike Upanishads, Buddhist philosophy does not concern itself with understanding of origin of creation, origin as sustenance of the universe. Buddha and his teaching emphasizes that misery and suffering inflicting the world was uniquely human, and so the solution of eliminating it did not exist in abstractness, that is universe. He is not bothered about how this universe has come into being, what is the stuff of the universe, what is the material of the universe. He is mainly concerned about the suffering and inflicting of suffering and the cure of suffering. Secondly, in Upanishadic doctrine, the individual existence and consciousness as a physical social being is completely ignored, even denigrated. Here the individual is always viewed and perceived in terms of abstract Atma, or the greater ultimate self, the sum total of the individual and the soul. The Buddhist philosophy, the individual is a more concrete entity, independent of notion of soul and the very definite physical and social attributes. It is also the reason that love in the Upanishad is not defined as love for the concrete other, but rather for the abstract universal. The abstractness is the realization and performance of love then makes it possible to go on viewing the concrete individual is differentiated from as a man, woman, Brahman, Shudra, or treat him or her differently according to rules of our national dharma. It says, on the other hand, the idea of self-love is central to Buddhism, which then translated and transmits to us as love and concern for others. Hence, the principle of centrality of the individual and love for self, which then gets carried forward as the acceptance of the individual as different yet equal and worthy of love, is something that Ambedkar saw of immense value in the effort to break free from the tyranny of caste-based hierarchy. Now I am discussing the faith state and the policy, Asoka Dhamma, and the influence of Buddhism. The entanglement between Buddhism as a religion and a foundation of governance, statecraft and polity is at display in most replacent form of ancient India during the modern reign Ashoka. Felt a deep profound sense of guilt, sorrow and remorse after conclusion of the successful but bloody conquest of the state of Kalinga in 262 BCE. Upon the conclusion, if the military campaign, the modern emperor rejected war and conquest as a means of expanding the realm of his empire, vowed to adopt the path of Dhamma Vijay, or the conquest through the spread of Dhamma, which has been interpreted by historians to have been simultaneously a state policy. Mind, I am again repeating it. The Dhamma, which has been reinterpreted by historians to have been simultaneously a state policy based on non-violence and righteousness, as well as a code of conduct, a way of life that he sets forth as desirable and normative among his subjects. Our knowledge and reinterpretation of Asoka's Dhamma is based on 13 rock edicts placed strategically through the expense of his empire and engraved with the masses of the right conduct of behavior, or both ruler and ruled. Although this has been a matter of protracted historiographical debate, the intersection between influence of Buddhism and Asoka Dhammas are unmistakable and acknowledged by most historians. The debate essentially is about the degree to which Dhamma mirrored the teaching of Buddhism. Both asked its followers to lead an honest, righteous life, practice non-violence, be respectable to elders, loyal to friends, shun bad tempers and excesses in life, to be tolerant to those who are not different from us in habit, culture, or faith. To these broadly defined directives of social conduct, Dhamma added a dimension of patrimonial kingship, which were the most important role played by the ruler, that to serve his subject as a father would care for his son. The edict further delineates the sinner and criminals to be treated with kindness before execution. That absolute loyalty towards the king was demanded of the subject. That all subjects were equal before the eye of ruler, and both great and little men have equal possibility of leading a good life. After life it went moderation with piety. According to Max Weber, all of this represented an influence of Buddhism on Dhamma, and also reflective a certain kind of democratic ethos are embedded in Buddhism. He inspired Dhamma, Max Weber says in his book Religion of India, Sociology of Hinduism and Buddhism. I quoted that lines from Max Weber. Max Weber says that thus Buddhism is quite intentionally treated here as a specific leveling, and in this sense a democratic religion, especially in connection with the derogatory treatment of rituals, including caste ritual. Now I will come down to colonialism and Buddhist revival. Even as the inequalities based on caste, class, religion, gender had always been an intrinsic part of life in India, these differentiations in pre-colonial period were more fluid and esoteric defined. The establishment of colonial rule in many ways cemented solidified inequalities. It is true that British were not first to invade and rule over India, which was just a period preceding their revival, have been several centuries of Muslim rule. However, British capitalism, which landed on Indian shores on the backs of industrialization, capitalism and the spread of printed world, carried with itself the tool of consolidation that had never been disposal of previous invaders of the land. Further inherent with the process of colonization was the need to get to know the land what was being colonized by the Britishers. India, with its multitude of faith, language, people, gods, foods, seemed like an incorrigible beast of land to colonize. And so they set about trying to understand it, and at the same time explain to India why the presence of white men from the small faraway island was necessary for them. Ancient books, scriptures were translated, missionaries were sent to remote interiors, most significantly cause created to make sense of neatly categorize the various kinds of people who inhabited India. In this attempt to assign a particular caste or jati, exercise of census making, however institutionalized, the previously more fluid caste-based hierarchy and set them in stone through the written word. The Indian response to changes and transformations, I'll just take a few minutes, sir. The Indian response to the changes and transformation brought by the colonialism depend upon which section of society it was that reacting to it. For primarily Hindu upper caste, class, strata of Indian society, colonialism was understood as economically exploitative and yet not entirely worth rejecting on account of possibility of exposure to Western modernity that it presented. Hence, while these elites opposed and protested against some aspects of colonial rule, they embraced others such as technology, Western education, good governance wholeheartedly. As has been argued by Partha Chatterjee, you must have heard about the Partha Chatterjee, Indian nationalism at this stage was defined through the binary of home and the land. It suggested that colonialism was capable of affecting the outer layer of Indian society, which might get influenced by the material change that it brings in from science, technology and education. However, India could never be truly colonized as long as its inner spiritual core remained pure and untouched by the forces of the West. However, in imagining this impenetrable pure inner core of Indian society, the early nationalists assumed or projected it as a kind of homogeneous, monolithic bulwark against the onslaught of colonialism. However, in reality, the social landscape was highly differentiated, one and east out, with long-standing inequalities. Those occupying the lower ends of the social spectrum felt as exploited and oppressed by elite upper caste class Hinduism as they did with colonialism. Perhaps even more with the former on the account of the long baggage of history, and so they felt resentful of being appropriated in elitist nationalist cause where stakes for them were most non-existent, as freedom from colonial rule never would translate into an actual change without freedom of Brahminical domain. Hence, the second half of the 19th century saw the emergence of several lower caste movements in different parts of the country, headed by most dynamic leaders from these communities against both tyranny of Brahmanism and colonialism. These movements were heavily influenced by Buddhist philosophy that preached non-violence, tolerance, kindness and dignity of individuals, brought about by the Buddhist revival of sorts in colonial India. The most important of these was the Mahima Dharma movement in Orissa under the Bhim Bhoy, Satya Sodhak Samaj under Jyoti Phule. It was, however, in Tamil Nadu that the intersection of Buddhism and lower caste movement revealed itself in most profound manner through the life of Ethiotic Thas. His life and work, in fact, was remarkable convergence of many themes. Dravidian movement in South, the firm egalitarian enlightenment heritage pointed by Phule, and finally re-established by Buddhism in India, this time as a religion of Dalit. In this work, the essence of Buddhism, ethos' interpretation of Buddhist faith, paved the way of Ambedkar Namo Buddhism. He writes, then in the personal development each individual, every thought or volition counts for something is not difficult to perceive, but there is a wrong selfless after death. There is not a migrating Atma can have no meaning, validity apart from the individual relation to mankind as a whole. Psychologically considered, an individual reincarnates his progeny and his physical karma is transmitted to them. Ethically, consider the psychic life of an individual cannot be separated from the psychic life of community of which we are the member. Then can a man have karma apart from other human beings? The enjoyment and suffering of an individual are not always the result of this special karma. The millionth fana tells us that it is an enormous extension of truth when it ignorant declare that every pain is the fruit of individual karma. And I am concluding with the saying of Ambedkar, one of the greatest thinker. He says that hence ethos is this, and this is the concluding part of my presentation, and I am ending with the Ambedkar saying, his book Buddha and his Dharma. In 1956 he organized a Mahar community for the conversion to Buddhism, and his contribution to Indian constitution and democracy is unquestionable. One of the greatest, rather the greatest thinker and the Buddhist. So he says that every human society, primitive, advanced, there are something beliefs which it regards as a sacred and the rest as profane. The sacred is something holy. To transgress it is a sacrilege. This was necessary because without sacredness, uncommon rules of morality will exist. He then concludes that in society not bound by a common morality protecting individual rights, exploitation will remain. This means there can be liberty for some but not for all. This means that there can be equality for few but none for the majority. And what is the remedy? The only remedy lies in making fraternity universally effective. What is fraternity? It is nothing but more name for brotherhood of men, which another name of morality. This is why Buddha preached that Dhamma is morality, and as Dhamma is sacred, so is morality. Thank you very much. Thank you for the patient hearing. I know it was a long paper, but I'm sorry. Thank you very much once again.